Good morning. My name is Mike Fegelman, and I'm the Executive Director of Honest Reporting Canada. We're a nonprofit organization that ensures fair and accurate Canadian media coverage of Israel. We started more than 20 years ago, but the overt media bias that we have experienced and seen over the last 2.5 years has made that era look quaint by comparison. Just hours after thousands of Palestinian terrorists invaded Israel on October 7th, carrying out an orgy of murder, rape, torture, and kidnappings, our taxpayer-funded broadcaster leapt into action. In a letter to editorial staff, George Ahey, CBC's former Director of Journalistic Standards and Practices, warned journalists not to use the word terrorists when referring to Hamas, not to admit that 2005 was the end of Israel's permanent presence in Gaza, which it was, and even when Canadian officials refer to Hamas as terrorists. Ahey wrote that reporters, quote, should add context to ensure that audiences understand this is opinion, not fact, end quote. Hamas is, of course, a listed terrorist organization. It soon became clear for the CBC and for wide swaths of the Canadian media landscape, their role was not to report the facts to Canadians, but to use their immense influence in society to promote a narrow ideological agenda. Present-day news outlets parrot talking points from pro-Palestinian activists and overwhelmingly feature guests with a predictable anti-Israel worldview, presenting them as credible while choosing not to include opposing voices. When anti-Israel groups sneeze, it achieves wall-to-wall news coverage. When Amnesty International accuses Israel of committing a genocide, going so far as to make up a new definition in order to do so, or when a discredited group of non-experts make such claims, they get widespread coverage. Yet when scholars documented Hamas's fabricated death toll, or penned a comprehensive report demonstrating that no genocide took place, they were ignored by our media. The unfounded claims of genocide and starvation were promoted ad nauseum by our media. And as it soon became clear that those allegations were false, reporters didn't apologize. They simply moved on. Now, like a cat chasing a laser dot on the wall, the worst offenders in anti-Israel media bias in Canada, whether the CBC, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, or others, take their cues not from what's newsworthy, but rather what complaints are being made by pro-Palestinian activists. When reporters document the worrying rise of Islamic radicalism in Canada, the presence of Iranian regime officials in our nation, or the impact of Qatari dark money in Canadian universities, they are treated as persona non grata. When a Canadian mosque recently honored Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei and glorified him as a martyr, our journalists ignored this brazen support for terrorism. Our journalists have a solemn duty to hold the powerful to account, to not act as their water carriers. But that's what they've done. Promoting hardline anti-Israel disinformation and acting as unpaid publicists for immense web of extremist actors in Canada. This media coverage directly contributes to a spike in anti-Jewish hate crimes. When Israel is painted as a genocidal and pariah state and opponents are widely silenced, a target is drawn on the back of Canadian Jews. The incessant demonization of Israel, and by extension Jews, has led to an unprecedented attack on the Jewish community, with terrorist rallies now a regular occurrence on Canadian streets, and Jewish schools and synagogues, as we saw this past week, shot at. While far too many elected leaders and law enforcement ignore this cancer that is in our midst. Over the past 2 years, our media promoted ideology over facts, and in the case of the CBC, did so at the taxpayers' expense. I'm happy to recount numerous examples of Canadian media bias that we have confronted. When our media act as stenographers for a regressive and hateful worldview, it's not reporting the news, it is creating it. And when our leaders stay silent, they let it happen. Our elected leaders must take the lead to remedy the situation. In my written testimony and submission to this committee, I've offered 3 concrete courses of action that you can take directly to counter these critical issues, and I would be happy to elucidate them today for anyone interested. As well, I've brought with me here today 2 colleagues, Dr. Haran Shani-Narkis, CEO of InnoHives, and Amanda Eskenazi, Director of Education at HR Canada Charitable Organization. They conducted a comprehensive review of the CBC's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war and have provided real scientific evidence of asymmetric coverage. It isn't an opinion that the CBC is one-sided. We now have scientific, irrefutable proof. Canadian taxpayers fund public broadcasters to provide accurate, impartial, and reliable information. When media outlets choose ideology over facts, they fail in this fundamental duty, leaving Canadians misinformed on issues of national security, on issues of terrorism and international conflict. This is not merely a concern for one community. It affects every Canadian's right to understand the world as it truly is. Restoring trust in our media is not a partisan issue, but a national imperative. Parliament must act now to ensure that our media serve Canadians with facts, with fairness, and with integrity, because an informed public depends on it, and our democracy requires it.